Okay, everyone, we're gonna get started now. People will be rolling in, but that's okay. And today, we are privileged to be joined by Carla Frisch. Thank you, Carla, for taking the time. Carla is the Acting Executive Director and Principal Deputy Director of the U.S. Department of Energy. Quick shout out, I used to work there. Office of Policy. She has served in this capacity since February 2021. As the leader of the DOE Office of Policy, Frisch is on point for domestic energy and climate policy, which honestly is a perfect follow-up to our opening keynote speaker, Ali Zaidi. So we really look forward to hearing what you have to say, Carla. And with that, I'll kick it off to you with the first question. Could you please give us an overview of your work at the DOE Office of Policy and the current state of federal climate policy?
Well, thank you so much for having me. And for those of you in the room, I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person, but I want to let you know that Dr. June Shepard is there in the room, if she can wave her arms or stand up. All right, everybody got eyes on her? Okay, she's an alum, and she is ready to connect with you after this session in person if you want to continue the discussion or get some hot career tips. We are hiring at Department of Energy. I'm so happy to be with you all. Coming from Office of Policy, the home of domestic energy policy, we advise Secretary Granholm and work across the entire federal government on all domestic energy policy matters. And if you learned anything from the sessions today, we are truly in a historic moment for energy policy, for climate policy, and for the American economy. At DOE, as Kara knows, we used to write reports about what we should do to support the energy system. And now we are in the middle of doing it at a pace and scale that is incredible, that we have never seen before in the US, and I would say globally. Part of that includes a renaissance in domestic manufacturing. You've probably heard Inflation Reduction Act and bipartisan infrastructure law are the biggest investments in climate and clean energy, and that they're supporting communities. But a lot of people don't know how much is happening with domestic manufacturing. And just since January 2021, we've seen more than $195 billion invested in clean energy manufacturing facilities, new or expanded manufacturing. That's for wind, solar, nuclear, hydrogen, EVs. Just on EV, domestic EV and battery manufacturing, since January 2021, we've seen over 400 new or expanded manufacturing facilities in the US. That's more than 130,000 new jobs in those supply chains. And you're probably seeing more EVs on the road. Last year, we had a record. Americans purchased 1.4 million EVs. Sales of EVs have quadrupled since January 2021. And we project we are on path to have half of all new car sales, more than half of all new car sales, electric or zero emissions by 2030. And the clean energy space, we've got manufacturing capacity that's expanding greatly in solar and wind and storage. And the actual build out of those clean energy generating facilities, last year we had a historic build out of solar, historic build out of storage. For the first time in a decade, new electricity generation from nuclear, from the Vogtle Unit 3 and 4 together, that powers 1 million homes and businesses a year. We broke ground on 10 major transmission projects. So the list goes on and on. I know you've been talking about it all day, but this is not just happening out of nowhere. It's not just this magical moment. This is the result of a concerted industrial strategy around clean energy. And that, as our Secretary Granholm, Secretary of Energy, has laid out, has 4 pillars. One of those is creating a favorable investment environment for clean energy deployment. So using tax credits and grants to drive private capital And we really think about this as government-enabled, private sector-led. So we're not the full leaders of this in the government. We're enabling the private sector to make that change. The second pillar is ensuring that the transition creates an economy that's fair, that benefits communities that have historically been left behind economically. We are requiring community benefits plans for our grants. We have the Justice 40 initiative, and we're seeing tangible results already in that front. The third pillar, of course, is continuing to develop an American workforce that's skilled, that allows the US to compete and to win in the global clean energy market. And that's not just about more jobs, we're really focused on the quality of the jobs. Quality meaning family sustaining wages, the opportunity to join a union if you want to, the opportunity to get paid through an apprenticeship while you're training, and to know you're gonna have a job at the end of your training. And then the fourth pillar, of course, is supporting industry with cutting edge research and development from that early stage work so that future generations of clean energy technology will be even more innovative than the last. The big example of that is our Energy Earthshots programs. You heard of the Moonshot. The Earthshot is where we have goals around heat pumps, for example, improving performance, reducing costs, around long duration energy storage, around all kinds of technologies to get that full span of innovation that you've been talking about today. And there's more, but Karen, I'll go back to you.
Well, we would look forward to hearing about more, but digging a little bit deeper into some of the major initiatives which you just touched upon, and which also Ali Zaidi touched upon in the opening remarks, are the Infrastructure Bill and the Inflation Reduction Act specifically. Can you walk us through what the DOE's role, as well as what part the Office of Policy plays in helping to implement these bills? Because I think that will set important context for my subsequent questions.
Absolutely. So Inflation Reduction Act, bipartisan infrastructure law, together it's the largest investment in infrastructure in US history. So that's energy, it's also roads, bridges, steel in the ground. And the Inflation Reduction Act really touches across all sectors of the economy. So you all are climate veterans at this point, you know there's no one solution, but we've got industrial, buildings, electricity, transportation, all kinds of investments. Now at DOE, what that means is our work from the early stage research and development has been expanded quite significantly into larger scale demonstrations, into deployment work, even more than we've done in the past. And this is at a scale that is very significant. We have just in the last 2 years announced over 80 billion with a B. Typically in the federal government, we're announcing in the millions, 80 billion in federal funding for clean energy. That's 13 billion to strengthen and modernize the electric grid, 4 billion for projects in clean energy generation and storage. We've got a significantly expanded loan program. We just announced this week a conditional commitment for our loan program to reopen the Holton Palisades nuclear power plant in Michigan. We've more than 13 billion invested in homes, businesses, schools, and nonprofits in clean energy and energy efficiency, and in the workers trained to do those retrofits to make those facilities work and to build careers for those workers. More than 9 billion in domestic supply chains. And just today, we announced the entities that are selected for the 48C manufacturing tax credit. This is a tax credit that's 30%. If you want to build a clean energy manufacturing facility, you get a 30% tax credit. It was capped at 10 billion, and so folks had to apply competitively, and they learned today if they got that tax credit. Now, it's private taxpayer information, so the names aren't released yet, but they will. Some of them will be sharing whether or not they've gotten that tax credit. We'll do another round of that later this year as well. We've invested more than 6 billion in industrial competitiveness and reducing industrial emissions. And we just announced this week many winners of our industrial decarb as aluminum, steel, cement decarb, And that includes the Kraft mac and cheese facility. If you've seen that facility, of course, making Kraft mac and cheese, you have to dehydrate a lot of food products, and that requires a lot of energy. So we're really working across the whole economy. That's led by our Undersecretary for Infrastructure and several offices. And all of that adds up to looking at DOE, looking across federal agencies, looking at the investment in the economy. We see a major shift in impacts on the US. So saving Americans more than $38 billion on electricity bills, doubling the share of clean electricity in the US by 2030, and reducing US net greenhouse gas emissions that puts us to 40% reduction by 2030 on a path, getting on that path to net zero by 2050. Just a couple of years ago, that is not where the US was headed. And the change from these laws, when you look at US emissions, that change is measurable on a global scale. It is very significant.
Amazing. And I'm already getting texts from the audience asking if it is possible to get data points in a list of all of the investment successes that you just recently stated, which we can maybe work to get access to. Regarding the tax credits in particular, I imagine the private sector, given the transformative and vast nature of these bills, might sometimes struggle with navigating how exactly to tap into these tax credits. And I know the Office of Policy works pretty closely with Treasury as well as with other federal agencies to help develop the guidance on these tax credits. So can you provide some insights to the private sector in terms of how they can actually navigate the complexity that might be implicit within some of these larger transformative but also somewhat complicated bills?
Yes, and before I get into tax credits, for those data lovers who just cannot wait, yes, you can have all of these data points. All the manufacturing data points are at energy.gov/invest. You can see by type of energy technology. We've got a map there. You can click on and off different technologies and see. And then all the data points about the spending out of DOE and the future opportunities for additional funding, because we've got another round of grid funding coming, another round of manufacturing tax credit competition coming. That is all at energy.gov/infrastructure. So the first one, energy.gov/invest, and then the second, energy.gov/infrastructure. Now on the tax credits, this is also a really historic moment. And for those of you studying the energy policy, the carrot and the stick, the tax credit is all about the carrot. It's all about the opportunity. And one issue we've had in the past with US tax credits is an on-again, off-again nature. You know, they were here for a couple of years and they weren't. They were passed retroactively. So industry didn't have the certainty. Now what the Inflation Reduction Act brings is 10 years of certainty. The tax credits are here and available, so folks can plan. So for industry, that includes tax credits for electricity generation, for clean fuels, for manufacturing. There's a brand new tax credit for per unit manufacturing of solar, of wind, of critical minerals, of storage here in the US. And what's built into those tax credits is a set of incentives that, for example, if you wanted to get an electricity investment tax credit, it starts at 6%. Now, if you have strong labor practices, if you have apprenticeship programs, that can bump you up to 30% tax credit. Then, let's say you use domestic content, you can get another 10% bonus. Put it in an energy community, you can get another 10% bonus. And then you can apply for an additional 10 to 20% bonus if you're putting it in a low-income facility, for example, affordable housing, or on land that is of a tribal nation. So you can get up to 70% tax credits. That is enough to significantly change investments, and we are already seeing that change, already seeing upticks in investments. And now what's interesting that Congress did is they said, well, it's not just about the private sector. And they made a new provision available that's called elected pay or direct pay, which says, hey, you NGOs, university, college, as long as you're a nonprofit, state government, local government, tribal nation, you too can get the tax credits. You don't pay taxes, that's okay. You fill out a form to IRS and say you want to get the elective pay, and basically you'll get 30% cash back on your clean energy project, and potentially more from all of those bonuses too.
Amazing.
And on the consumer, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. Love to hear
Well,
about the consumer side.
Yes, the PSA for all of you, everyone you know, there's lots of 10 years of certainty for consumer tax credits. If you want to build some solar, if you want to buy an EV, a used EV, now gets a tax credit, that's new. If you want to have an energy battery backup, energy storage, that's a new thing, you can get a tax credit. And those are here for 10 years. So if folks want to make investment 1 year, can start with, let's say, an efficient insulation to seal your home. Then you want to work towards an efficient HVAC, a heat pump for heating and cooling. Then you want to get a heat pump water heater. Then you want to get those solar panels, get that EV. Folks can build over 10 years. And one I really like personally too is there's actually a tax credit for an energy audit. So if you don't know where to start, then you can get a professional to come in and help you figure out what kind of energy investments would it make sense to make in this home.
Amazing. And speaking of certainty, what might be on some people's mind is the election that is coming up. Can you speak to what might happen with the change of administration to the tax credits and these two bills more broadly?
Right, so these are laws, which means they've passed the House, they've passed the Senate, and they've been signed by the President. So for future laws or changes in laws, they go through that process. But what we have been seeing because of this Invest in America effort is ribbon cuttings all across America, and we're seeing local and federal politicians come out for those ribbon cuttings. And as I mentioned, the new manufacturing facilities, which involves significant investments in communities, significant job opportunities. So when you think about, okay, what is it that we want as a nation for energy? What are communities asking for? For many of those investments, they're already seeing benefits, and they want to continue to see those benefits. Now, of course, we do have to do more to get where we want to be for a sustainable future, and that requires action not only from the executive branch and Congress, but from state and local government, from the private sector, and civil society.
Got it. Now transitioning to some of the incredible opportunities that are now available at the DOE with all of this investment that has come in via the bills. Can you provide some insight into, you mentioned that your office is hiring, but also could you talk about other opportunities even within the Office of Policy? I know the Office of Jobs is one of the verticals that you oversee, so it would be very helpful for the audience to get a sense of what opportunities might be available at the DOE for them to be able to tap into and how they can tap into these opportunities.
Well, it is a historic moment in time, and I hope all of you will consider federal service. It is extremely rewarding to be at the center of all of this and being able to help shape it and make it happen. Now, for federal service, there's lots of opportunities. We're hiring across all of DOE. We have a clean energy core effort. So that's energy.gov/careers. And you can start there to look at all of the opportunities. For our own Office of Policy, we have an opportunities website with open fellowships that includes the Energy Jobs Office for fellowships. And then if you're interested in other agencies, every federal position is posted on usajobs.gov. That process can take time, but I will say I have used it many, many times in my federal career to search through and find talent and hire out of that USA Jobs resume pool. So that's a place to consider. And then the White House has also recently announced the American Climate Corps. And it's a new initiative focused on training early career people with high demand skills to work in the energy economy. And there's a lot of information about that at whitehouse.gov/climate corps. Now, if federal government isn't for you, and I'd say it probably is, so check it out. There's lots of state and local government opportunities. And then, of course, the clean energy industry is having this extreme growth moment right now, in part supported by this Invest in America effort. So there's a lot of opportunities in the private sector too.
And looking at your own career path, what motivated you to dedicate yourself to climate policy, and what advice would you give to those aspiring to influence policy in this field?
So I think one of the most important things in the policy space is the quality of the data and analysis. And we are constantly looking for, what's the updated publication, what's another way to look at something, and then importantly, distilling that down and having it available at the right time and the right place. Our congressional staff looking for new ideas, we've got to make sure that they're getting the results of the analysis, new publications out there. Is the White House looking to announce something new? We've got to make sure that they're aware of it. So doing the rigorous work with the analytics and the data, and then really taking the time to find, okay, so what is the finding? So what does this mean? And do I have maybe the 80% quality answer in the moment in time that a policymaker is going to use it? We got to make sure that I'm sharing it with them. So that the second part about the sharing, once the work is done, is just really important, and it takes a lot of effort to distill those findings and get them in the hands of people who want them. But we are here, we are listening, and we've also got to think about what's the next set of ideas to get us even further on this path to clean energy.
And this is my final question. This is my favorite question that I like to ask people who I have had the privilege to interview, and am especially excited to hear your answer. So reflecting through the lens of your career, which by many accounts has been really inspiring, is there any piece of career advice you would give to your 25-year-old self and then your 35-year-old self?
This is a really good question. So early on, one piece of advice I would give to myself, and I like to give to others now, is can you choose a focus area of what it is, what's that thing that interests you that you want to go deeper on? What's the thing that you can really become an expert on? When I'm interviewing people and they say, okay, I'm really interested in clean energy, then I say, okay, which part? And sometimes someone will say, I'm just really into electric buses, or I'm just really into figuring out the next type of solar, or I'm really into manufacturing opportunities. And that's something, I can remember about that person. And when there's an opportunity that comes up, I can make that connection. So having, some specific focus area that you're interested in, that you're an expert on, I think that's really important. And then later on, as time passes, I think one of the most important things is really building and sustaining those relationships with your colleagues, because these problems that we're working on, these are systems problems. These are problems that have been around, for decades, many cases, hundreds of years, that we are trying to figure out. And the way to best come up with those solutions, to optimize a policy design, it is working in teams, and it is relying on expertise from others that you may not have yourself. So those relationships are really important to develop, but part of that is building those relationships on that expertise. So what's the piece of expertise that you're bringing, and then what's the piece of expertise that each of your colleagues has, and you being aware of that expertise and ready to call them back up in a moment. And maybe you have 1 hour, 1 week to come up with policy design. Really building on that from your colleagues. And I think that's what you're trying to do here with the conference today, right? Is see some of those ideas, create those networking opportunities. And I think it's fabulous that all of you are there to really take advantage of that.
Thank you so much, Carla, for taking the time. I know you weren't feeling that well, and it really means a lot to us that you still participated here today. So thank you.